Welcome to, well, frankly, it's a glorious Thursday outside. I'm Chris Hynes, former Commissioner for Body Corporate and Community Management, Strata Adviser with Hynes Legal. With me, as always, Frank Higginson, partner, Hynes Legal. Frank, welcome.
Hello, Chris. Hello, everyone, yet again. Yeah, it's a lot nicer this arvo than it was yesterday afternoon, which was a thunderous
It was
storm.
quite something, wasn't it? And we are also back to our usual setup after last week's in-person combined setup, which actually went quite well. It's had some good feedback.
If we say so ourselves.
Yeah, but we're back to what would you call it? Default settings today. And today we are your relationship gurus. Yes, I know. Go figure. But next in the relationship rescue series. So if you cast your mind back a few weeks, we did one about relationship rescue with your body corporate manager, which I thought went pretty well. Again, great response. So this week, relationship rescue with your resident manager. We are here to rescue difficult body corporate relationships and get them back on track. So we're not therapists, Frank, not yet,
No.
Anyway. But we see a lot of where it goes wrong, don't we?
Absolutely. So it is, yeah, it's almost a little bit not dangerous. I mean, we're sitting here trying to psychoanalyze people, not quite it. Probably more than anything else, which is what this is all about, is sort of getting people to understand where we see them going wrong so that hopefully there's less need for lawyers.
And we are actually in the business, Frank, of considering the humanity of all of these situations. And I've got to say, that is often lost in a body corporate dispute. What are my rights? What about blah? What about this? What about that? Yeah, sure, all of that's true. What about the humanity of the situation? Why are we locked in this titanic death struggle to the end? No death struggles today. It's about relationship rescue. As I say, today it's about your resident manager. So quick recap, Frank. A few weeks ago in April, seems like an eternity away now, doesn't it? But yeah, we did ending management rights, not terminating, ending management rights. And we talked about that relationship, Frank, didn't we, between body corporate and management rights holder. And it's a fundamental relationship in a body corporate, isn't it?
And in a sense, we probably got it slightly out of order. It would have been good to have this one early in terms of what we're going to do today, is really setting the scene for what creates good management rights relationships, because you're having the conversation about ending them when that's come about and gone wrong. So, you know, inevitably, we don't have a magic wand to fix every single problem that's out there. Some of them are just unsolvable, but we really do think that if people apply a lot of the stuff we're talking about today, then the chances of you going wrong in your management rights relationship probably get less and less.
Absolutely. And we want to talk about, I suppose, how to avoid, how to maintain, but then if things do go wrong, how do you avoid a Bill Gates divorce?
Story of the week, isn't it? Not too messy yet, as much as they both seem to have lawyered up.
They're just getting started, aren't they?
Right. Yeah.
Quick reminder to everybody, make sure that you do register to get your reminders for these events, because that's where you find out topics. You get a bit of content from us as well. You can ask us questions live today. You can ask us questions after the event as well, just in the YouTube chat function. We'll get to as many of those as we can today. First things first, we're talking about relationship rescue, Frank. What kind of relationship does a body corporate and a resident manager actually need? That's a big question.
It is a big question. And I suppose I've got a little, she's not so little anymore, 12-year-old daughter going on, not quite 16 yet, but I can see it around the corner. BFFs and all that, you know, best friends forever. I don't think that's the typical management rights relationship, nor is it the one that you actually should have. I mean, ultimately, the core of any management rights relationship is a business one. And in that sense, I say to clients all the time, is that our relationship with bodies corporate as their lawyers, or with management rights owners as their lawyers, is a business one. We're contracted usually to provide a particular service for a particular fee over a particular period. And the difference substantially, of course, is that the term of our engagement as their lawyers is as limited as potentially the next phone call where, Frank, I'm picking someone else. So please pack your file up and send it here, and I'm gone. Management rights relationships, that same style of business relationship where a manager's engaged to provide services for a period set out in the agreement, and that period is usually a fairly substantial one, which is the big difference between the nature of our engagement as lawyers and those of managers. And I think probably if we're going to start, well, actually we'll get into some, not really, no, we'll cover this now actually as I think about it. That is the starting point, is that committees need to realise that they are locked into a contract with their resident manager. Almost without exception. There's sometimes it can go wrong where there might be some technical deficiency or otherwise, but you are locked in that relationship, and it doesn't come to an end other than through a whole lot of pain or cause. So that's a starting point. You can't just walk away from it. So it isn't quite a Bill Gates situation there where they've decided to tear up the Microsoft fortune and go their separate ways, and that's what they're doing. This is a long-term contractual relationship between the body corporate and the manager. So that's the context of really what this is about today, is talking to people about managing inside that relationship. But the core of it, it is business.
It absolutely is business. So let's refresh. The primary relationship here is between the body corporate and the resident manager. That's where the contract is formed between. And then the committee, as the day-to-day operational arm of the body corporate, has the responsibility for the day-to-day, stands to reason, operationalisation. Do you like that one, Frank?
Yeah, I'll look that up in the dictionary later on to see if it's there, Chris.
Of the relationship. So that's where it all starts. So it's got to work for each party. Then the secondary relationships is where the lot owners and occupiers get involved. So the management rights holder usually, I think in most cases, has the letting rights authority as well for the scheme. And so would have individual relationships with owners whose lots are in their pool, and then would have relationships with the tenants there as well. But there's also another layer to that where the management rights holder has a relationship, and I'll put it in inverted commas, with owners and occupiers even if they're not in the pool. Because the management rights holder is working on common property, and everybody has a stake in common property in some way, shape or form, don't they, Frank?
They do. I mean, in theory, everyone owns a proportionate share in it based on their interest schedule lot entitlements, as much as that's not actually on the title to their lot. So yeah, so the management rights owner engages with all those people, but in theory only reports to the committee, as much as, you know, I think we did a webinar a few weeks back about where managers go wrong, and resident managers go wrong. I'm not sure we quite covered this, but we get it all the time too, where people that aren't on the committee are running around giving instructions to the resident manager about this, that, the other, when in theory that actually should go back up to the committee, and the committee should then pass down those instructions in accordance with the agreement. You know, so those lines of communication can get crossed quite a bit.
Very easily. And I suppose it goes towards our sort of the main point that we want to make here, Frank. This is not a sweetheart, eternal love situation. Like if you happen to become, you know, sociable and friendly with your resident manager, that's great. Happy days. Nobody's telling you you shouldn't do that. Maybe I say it occasionally, and there's an argument around that. If you do, that's well and good, but your primary objective is a business relationship, because it's a transactional relationship, isn't it, Frank? It's a transaction. If I'm the resident manager and you're the committee, Frank, I am providing you services, you're providing me with oversight, and ultimately you are responsible for providing me with income.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep. And outside that, we get the personal relationships that happen in any business relationship, the same as, you know, someone said to me 1,000 years ago, all my clients are friends and all my friends are potential clients. I don't think it's quite that, not quite that mercenary, but there are some clients who we build really good relationships with, and you're quite happy to socialise with them and all that sort of stuff. And there's some clients who you'd probably quite happily never deal with again. So management rights is the exact same. So you might have a wonderful personal relationship, or you might not, but at the core of it, still, you don't need to have the whole thing hinging on being best friends. It's about the nature of the business relationship itself. And I think one of the big analogies I give committees all the time, and we'll start to get into some where I suppose some of these things do go wrong, is it's as much as managers are contractors, they're not employees. So in a sense, with my employees and what we do every day, we're still working from home, is we start the whole office every day with an 8:30 meeting on Teams. And it's within the scope of my ability as an employer to say to people, that's what you've got to do. You log on, you join the meeting, you engage, blah, blah, blah. That's not the nature of the relationship that a committee or a body corporate has with a manager. They're not employees, but I think one of the best ways for a committee to go into a management rights relationship mindset is, in a sense, to engage with them as if they were. Because you don't treat employees in lots of the ways that we see committees treat resident managers. And I mean, this is, Chris, I suppose we rattled off a couple of quick ones previously. I mean, we start, I suppose, by speaking to people as if how you expect to be spoken back to. And that's assuming you're not psychotic. So if you treat people with professional respect, then you usually get that back in return. And I suppose, some of the less professional things we see, and this might be at the tail end of a frustration of volunteers, but in terms of how to press someone's buttons, the whole, I pay your wages, so you've got to do what I tell you.
And that's usually a red flag that something's wrong.
Absolutely.
That's a really good one. Another one, and you can insert whichever word you want next: bullying, harassment, defamation, intimidation, gaslighting. You can expect that if those statements are being uttered, then things aren't right. I know my rights. Do you?
I've read the Act. It's always a great one.
Yeah.
Even though all of the management rights stuff's really in the modules, but anyway.
Another good flag that it's not the best relationship that it could be. Here is the new list of duties that you will need to do from next week.
Or even better, we're going to cut your salary.
Yeah.
We're going to knock your salary down 10 grand. Like, all of those are red flags. And in a sense, they're not the things that you would say to an employee. So when these things are happening, it's never a good thing. And the other thing is, from a management rights perspective, a committee needs to understand that a manager usually has a substantial investment in the value of that management rights business. So anything that threatens the value of that is instantaneously going to be a couple of fingers in the chest pointing at them, declaring war. Which is never, ever a good thing.
And then less so about actual words and actions, but more so actions, Frank. Sending out a breach notice with little or no warning is dead giveaway, something that's not going to work right in the scenario. And then any other kind of, we'll call them standovery kind of tactics. Think about it this way. Let's just say that, Frank, you owned a business and you had an employee on site, and you said to that employee, pick up that rubbish over there. And that's all you ever said. I don't think that would cut it as great employer-employee relationship, and there would probably be some issues out of that. So why would you, as a committee member or an owner, think it okay to speak to a caretaker in that fashion? No, you shouldn't be doing that. There's a process to go through, and there's a way to put it.
Absolutely. So bear it in mind now that this is a business relationship. So I think probably for us, there's two things to this. There's the maintenance of it. So what's best practice around the maintenance of this business relationship? And then after that, if it's not quite going right, what's the best way to repair it? And the reality is, we were talking about sort of moving on managers in one sense. I think when we set this a little while ago, we're going to run out of time for that again. So that'll be part 3 of this. So collectively, the 3 of these things will be almost the complete management rights relationship Bible from a committee perspective. So, and I suppose when you start with business relationships, it starts with a degree of mutual understanding. Who's doing what? How are we going to do it? And making sure that you are actually doing it. So that, again, is not big letters of demand, all that sort of stuff. It is just, and even between Chris and I, we know between ourselves what we've got to do to prepare for one of these webinars. we do it. So our expectations of each other are very clearly understood. And in management rights, that's the same thing. And probably the difficulty with this is the nature of the strata market is that quite often, I mean, it's very rare to find lawyers in management rights. Quite often you find them on committees. Not quite often, more often I'd say. But the reality is that most committee members are volunteers without any detailed experience in management rights in strata. There's no training for it, as much as that's something we're looking at, so stay tuned for that. And so it's quite common that people don't actually even understand the nature of the relationship they've got before they start arguing. So I think for me, in terms of best practice, if you're on a committee and if you have a resident manager, and if you want to get the best out of that relationship, there's probably some golden rules that come up with that. And the very, very first one is to read the management rights agreements. That's the first bit of advice I give management rights clients, the first bit of advice I give committees. Read the agreements. Understand what it is that your contract is.
Yep.
You know?
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Sorry, go on, Frank.
No, I was going to say, probably lots of body corporate managers have lots of experience with management rights agreements as well. So talking to them about what best practice is and how they work, and particularly, you know, if you, well, not all of them, every body corporate management company is going to have a bunch of management rights buildings in their portfolio. So talking to them about how they get the best out of managers is also a good thing.
Educate yourself is the next tip that we're giving. So this is all framed from the committee's perspective, as we said at the outset. So educate yourself. There are so many resources out there. There's ours. From the Commissioner's office, there's free online training for committee members.
Who wrote that, Chris?
Some useless public servant.
A former commissioner.
I actually didn't write that one. But anyway, yeah, no, it's an excellent resource, that one. Couldn't recommend it enough.
And we could add people starting with us are asked to do it straight up.
Yep.
Why not? But well, I mean, the core of it really, in terms of relationships, is communication about communication, and then a little bit more communication. So, you know, and ideally that is face-to-face communication. Like writing's fine, emails are fine, letters are fine, but from a engaged committee perspective, if you catch up with your resident manager regularly, it absolutely allows you to iron out issues that might be brewing, and more importantly, it allows you to set expectations, because the reality is, and this is, you know, something that probably the working group will get to at some stage in the future, I should say that strata law reform, is lots of management rights agreements have very generic set of duties that don't really potentially sometimes match what the scheme's actually going to require. And certainly the easiest example, mow the lawn is required. As required by who? To what standard? So how often? When are we doing it? All that sort of stuff. So that doesn't mean 3:30 on a Tuesday. That might mean once a week during summer. But those sort of conversations and expectations are definitely best set together and reach an agreement, which is different from, you know, one of the problems we mentioned before about here's the new duties list that you're doing next week. That's so engaging with people rather than belting them and demanding things is absolutely the way to do it.
Absolutely, Frank. Not delegating decision making. I think, Frank, you've got a quick war story on that one.
I do. I was talking to a body corporate client this week who, a committee member who wasn't quite happy with, I suppose, him having to circulate all of the information that we're advising this particular body corporate on to his fellow committee members, because he's the only one that puts the time in to come and show up to the meetings. And I said, well, mate, that's you doing the heavy lifting. Other people on the committee, you've got to get them involved as well. And if they're not going to get involved, then it's up to you to decide how much you're going to do. Because ultimately, the thing we're doing for this particular body corporate is not a simple yes or no answer. There's a whole bunch of decisions that the committee's going to make, and he's struggling with relaying what we're telling him to the committee. So people have got to get involved.
Yep. Now here's a hot tip to finish off this kind of discussion, and I suspect some people watching this will not necessarily approve of this one, but you'd be surprised. Never ever underestimate the value of positive reinforcement. So, for owners, committee members, have you ever walked out the front door of your complex and thought, gee, the gardens are looking really good at the moment? If yes, drop your caretaker a line and tell them that. I just want to say the gardens are looking spectacular. I just want to say the pool is amazing at the moment. Thank you. What's the harm in doing that? Seriously, positive reinforcement. And then the flip side is also true, I think, Frank. If you're a management rights holder and you've gone to a committee meeting and you think, oh, this is going to be torture, and it's actually constructive and productive and things get decided and things get ticked off the list, drop the committee an email afterwards. That was really constructive today, guys. Thank you.
Absolutely. It really builds, it builds goodwill and it builds relationships, you know, and it makes those bridges when you do have a little bit of a difficult thing to converse with, not leaving you with thinking that the other side are a complete pack of so-and-sos. Because clearly there's feedback in the past, you know what I mean? It really, it does make a massive difference. And it's so easy in this day and age to fire off a snarky email, you know, after if you're unhappy about something, firing off an email to say well done to someone makes a massive difference. And I, you know, get a warm and gushy here. When you get clients say that to you, not, you know, I'd like to think we do a pretty good job most of the time, if not all of the time, but having clients say to you, that was bloody unreal, thank you very much, is actually, it makes you want to go that extra mile the next time they've actually got something that they need you for. They're the phone calls that get returned immediately as opposed to push back half an hour as an example. So it makes a difference.
You'd never do that, Frank, would you?
Oh, sometimes when I got 15 to recall, 15 calls back, I got to pick a priority list. So anyway.
No, look, I think there'd be people watching this who go, oh, that's just stupid. That's really, how can two so-called strata experts sit there and say positive reinforcement? Well, I can tell you from experience, it works. Frank just said it works. I can tell you it from experience, it works. You won't lose face, and it's not as though you'll end up being seen as weak or in a bad position legally. Nothing, you don't lose anything by being complimentary, Frank, do you?
No, not at all. Not at all.
And a comment there from Grey Palladium, positive reinforcement does help. Got 2 positive texts in 6 years. Well,
it does, but the people who texted, they're the ones you got to look out for and help. It really, it makes a massive difference, you know. It's just, it's, you know, you catch more flies with honey, don't you?
You absolutely do. So look, we've talked about a few different things there. Let's talk about some repair, Frank. So let's move into the repair.
Yeah, so we've got expectations. We've got a communications channel, hopefully. We've got an idea about what should be expected of each other side. Hopefully we've got a respectful relationship where we can have those conversations, in which case you've actually got to have it. So probably the issue here with repair for me is that people tend to go legal early. So again, and where I get to is you never ever really lose the right to go legal. You know, I can fire off a letter of demand next week, next month, next year in relation to something that's not working. But the moment that happens, usually what happens, if you get a letter from a lawyer, you might go see a lawyer and then it's out of your hands and the lawyers are engaging with each other and it turns into a legal fight. And this is absolutely what Chris and I have seen more often than anything else. A lot of the disputes that we have start with this sort of stuff turning into legal when it really could have been sorted out with a conversation. That's the brutal reality of it.
The classic example that's emerged only in the last week or 2 weeks is what's happening with Christine Holgate and Australia Post. Everybody knows what happened to Christine Holgate. Now she's moved on to another job, but she's still got an issue to resolve with Australia Post. And now she is effectively demanding a non-legal solution, Frank, mediation. And the two sides are now kind of fighting it out as to the terms of that. The point being, there is a very public and a very high-profile fight going on about not taking legal action and about how that can be avoided. So if it's good enough for that scenario, I don't know why it is not good enough for this scenario too.
And this is part of it, is everyone thinks that's your only choice, and it's not.
Yeah.
So it may be where you finish, and it might be that you've got no other choice to do that, but there's absolutely options to exhaust beforehand. And this is the problem sometimes, I think, for committees, is be it hoodwinked. They put their hand up at a general meeting, the body corporate manager looked at them and said, well, we've got no one to be chairperson. Would you like to do it, Chris? And you say, sure, without understanding what it is. And it actually does involve potentially more work than simply rolling up to a budget meeting once a year and then signing yes to some box. Because these type of relationships, they're not simple ones to manage. Like I said, there's a few moving parts, and it is that employment, that management experience, in a sense, that you'll get if you don't have, that makes a massive difference in avoiding long-term conflict. So that ability to have a difficult conversation, if you've set the ground rules and have a difficult conversation and engage with someone when things aren't quite working, is a really, really important part of avoiding long-term pain. And right. Then it's a matter of record keeping, isn't it? So we had this conversation, and again, back to that employment scenario. If we were going to give someone an official warning for misconduct or something like that wasn't a sackable offence, then we would have them with a support person, potentially us talking to them, and there'd be a follow-up afterwards to say, okay, we've had this conversation, this was the issue, this is what our expectations are, or these are what our expectations are going forward, and we'll see you again in 4 weeks' time to make sure we're on the same page. That sort of structured process, which isn't too legally overbearing, but just sort of starts to get the seriousness going and tracks what's happening, is the way to deal with personality issues, with performance, particularly performance issues early.
Record keeping is all important. And I guess if talking doesn't succeed, if that kind of negotiated process doesn't succeed, then you do have to resort to written stuff. So this is all about letters, emails. Good tip that you've introduced, Frank. Write like you are expecting a judge to read it later.
Absolutely. That's the first. Then we've got a new lawyer that started this week, and he's all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, moving down from Townsville tomorrow. We'll see how enthusiastic he is to see whether he's watching this and whether he comments. I won't mention that we've said we're going to mention him. But that's the first bit of advice he gets too, because ultimately everything you write, particularly in these sort of situations, if we're moving towards repair, like, you're a complete idiot, I can't believe you ever had the money to buy this business, is never, ever, ever going to look good in front of a member of QCAT or a judge. So you've got to stay professional. It's back to that business relationship. It's back to as if they were employees. You wouldn't ever say that to an employee, ever. So why would you do it now? Recognize you might be frustrated, but it's a matter of this coming back to taking the emotions out of it. What's the agreement actually require? What did we agree that would actually mean? Can we please get back to doing that?
And look back to the talking issue very quickly. If talking isn't working, then also it's probably not a bad point to ask yourself, is there a reason for that? Is there a language barrier, for example? Are there some personal issues happening in the background which are having an impact? Is there some medical stuff going on in the background? I mean, we saw it during with the worst of COVID, didn't we, Frank? Where the pressures of the pandemic and lockdown were having some really serious implications for relationships in bodies corporate a few times. You need, and as much as we said at the start, this is not a personal relationship, it's not, but we did also say, remember the humanity of it as well. There might be some very good reasons that talking is not working.
And even, not necessarily, there's lots of resident managers that are Chinese. So in that sense, there's a language difficulty, and there's also potentially a cultural disconnect between, different cultures deal with these things in different ways. So both, and I suppose this is part of what Chris does from time to time as well, behind the scenes, or whether it's sort of up front to a degree, helping manage the process so that people can actually understand each other. So it might even be that you have an interpreter along who understands management rights, because in Chinese, there's actually no word for management rights or words. So it's not even in the language. So helping people understand what it's about and all that sort of stuff can become a really important thing, because it's that, again, back to that expectation element of it. So, and well, I mean, the theme of this, if we're going to do it, was communication, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really. And so from the repair side of things, it's, to me, go legal last. You leave that as the very last resort, but you might get some guidance along the way through in terms of what you could be doing and what you should be doing. And I suppose for me, almost every single issue like this is takes me back to when I was a little article clerk. And now, how? Where are we now? Where do we want to get to? And then how do we get there? And I think
oddly enough, Frank, that's also, they are also almost word for word the techniques that one is taught when one becomes a mediator. Same thing. Where are we now? Where do we want to be?
Yeah,
almost identical, which is
yep.
my part of the world.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think that's really good food for thought for whether you're a committee owner or resident manager or body corporate manager for that matter, watching today, is to keep those kinds of things constantly ticking over in the mind. I mean, it's never just one thing that you do that's going to repair the relationships. It's a number of things done together in tandem. Together in tandem. Tautology.
And you haven't even been drinking today, have you?
Not yeah. Clearly not enough, Frank. Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah.
And it probably is that how. A lot of people think the how is just getting a big stick and beating people around the head with it.
Yeah.
And that is very much not the answer, particularly at these early stages. And I suppose part 3 of this might be a little bit more of the stick rather than the carrot. Yeah. But this is really about the carrot. And it's about that professional working relationship that people are stuck in.
Absolutely. Gosh, we've come to the end of time again. It really did fly by today. I want to thank everybody who's participating today. Some good comments there as well. Again,
minor repairs and maintenance, absolutely. So this is, if you're going to look at an issue in management rights agreements, it's what are managers paid? So what is a manager required to do? What are they paid? Quite often, where does the line start and finish between minor repairs and maintenance? And that's one of those grey areas, the same as skilled trades, that comes up all the time in management rights contracts. And to me, there's going to be a legal answer there potentially at the back end that might involve some artistry, but at the front end, that's about expectation management and relationship building. So if we've got that expectation set and we do have a relationship, then we're able to have conversations without charging off to get legal advice from lawyers and potentially issuing breach notices and all that sort of stuff. That's really what this is all about.
I think so, Frank. Yeah, thanks for that comment, Linda. Thanks everyone for today. As I say, we'll have to do a part 3 on this one, which will be, as Frank said, more about the stick than anything else. Stay tuned for that. We'll probably do that one next month, I would expect. Again, don't forget to register so you can find out exactly that, the topics. Next week is another sequel, Challenging People, the sequel. It's one of our most watched webinars so far. The previous one we did on challenging person facilitation. We're going to follow up what we didn't get to in the last one.
Which is actually, I think we talk about a lot of things that aren't legal. That'll actually have some legal content to it.
It will. Stay tuned for that one. But for now, thanks everyone. Frank, thank you.
Thanks everyone.
We'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.